All right, everyone, let's get started with today's event. Welcome. My name is Jamie Robb, Director of Client Operations here at 3Terra. Matt, I'm going to ask you to join me here. Fabulous. This is our Director of Innovation. So this is our fifth Innovation Center event and the second with a decision support focus. Matt, can you tell our audience a little bit about the history of Innovation Center and the purpose of today's event?
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, everyone. My name is Matt Gertz. Many of you know me already, Director of Innovation here at 3Terra. This Innovation Center event started about 4 years ago um, when hospitals were starting to make more and more use of the DQA platform, and we found hospitals using it in a unique and interesting ways. And we needed a way to kind of share with peer hospitals what they were doing so that others could take their learnings and apply them at their hospitals. So it's meant to be a community event where hospitals can share a variety of things that they've learned, experiences that they've had, so that others can kind of learn from that. And I think every time that we've done this event, the viewership and the community that's been engaged in the event has increased. I think today we're going to have the most number of people that we've ever had, and we're really excited to kind of share a really interesting lineup of hospitals and their experiences in this. So hopefully you can learn something new and kind of take something back and apply it at your hospital after today's session.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Matt. Yeah, today we have over 146 participants, and I see that there are still quite a few that are coming through as well, and more than 65 organizations joining us. So thanks for all of you for making the time and joining us here today. We have a great lineup for you. So we have 3 different sessions and 5 DQA hospitals that are going to be sharing their experiences with our broader community. And just to start off with a little light housekeeping. So today's session is being recorded. We will share the edited version with all of you later this week. And we've also set time aside for a Q&A at the end of each session. So don't be shy. Please drop your questions in the chat at any point. We'll be monitoring this throughout. And if we don't happen to get a chance to go through every single question, we will follow up afterwards. Let's get everything started here. So many of you already use DQA, and you know that it automatically calculates a variety of methodologies like QBPs, hospital harm, and many others on your behalf. With the nightly refresh, newly coded records are incorporated into these calculations so we can make them as timely as possible. While all of these are accessible through the front-end web platform, you may also want to leverage them through the back-end SQL database for additional use cases. So to kick off this event, we're excited to welcome Brittany Lockwood from RVH, who's going to share how her team has enhanced their internal reporting, optimized front and back-end techniques, and she's also going to provide some examples that you might want to take back and implement at your hospital. Welcome, Brittany.
Perfect. Thank you, Jamie. Let me just steal the screen for 1 second. All right. Are we good on your end, Jamie?
You are good.
Perfect. So first off, I just want to thank again Jamie and Matt from 3Terra for inviting me here today. I'm really passionate about functional data tools that are accessible and trustworthy, and I'm really happy that I'm here to share my experience today. So as Jamie mentioned, my name is Brittany Lockwood. I am the manager of decision support here at Royal Victoria Hospital in Barrie. I've been lucky to have been part of this organization for over 12 years, and I've spent the last 7 years in various roles within decision support. So before I jump into how our team has used Data Quality Assist in our day-to-day, I just thought I'd set the stage with our team and our organization. So our decision support team, we are made up of 17 individuals, and we also provide decision support services to 5 other hospitals. For geographic reference, I've just plotted them here on the map in blue, and RVH is there in black. So we do support West Parry Sound Health Center, Georgian Bay General, Collingwood Marine, Stevenson Memorial, as well as Headwaters Health Center. Over the next 10 minutes, I'll share how RVH Decision Support has utilized 3Terra's Data Quality Assist, and we've really transitioned from a data supplier to a data consumer. So our journey with utilizing DQA began with our QBP reporting. The report that you're seeing here on the left, this is a self-service Microsoft Report Builder report that our team has made. It was accessed by various clinical and financial leaders to monitor their QBP completion in relation to their funded volumes. For any of the data gurus in this group, this report was created with SQL logic, and it was extracting data from our Med 2020 coding system. We would utilize the QBP methodology guides from the MOH to create the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, and we would assign records to the QBP categories. These reports contained over 1,500 lines of SQL code. They were quite slow to run, and they required manual maintenance for any code changes that came to us from the Ministry of Health. The QBP report that gave our team the biggest headaches were those GI endoscopy cases, assigning index categories and ensuring that we captured the correct interventions, but not too many interventions, and this was really our intro to DQA. So one of the hospitals that we partnered with kept informing us that the self-service tools that we created for them were wrong. They were actually using 3Terra's DQA report, the GI endoscopy summary report, which I've included a snippet of in the top right here. And we would get feedback that the volumes or the weights for various index categories were incorrect on the self-service report that we created. We would have the hospital that we partnered with share with us the case level summary, which I've included here down at the bottom, and we would compare it to various records that did not match. So we would review cases that we had in our SQL report to what was in 3Terra's DQA, and would find where patients either had different intervention categories or different weights. This DQA tool made it really easy for us to understand which cases were incorrect, and we got to about 95% accuracy this way, but we still struggled with that last 5%. We could not figure out why we were getting different case weights or different intervention categories than the DQA tool had. We were able to be contacted with an individual at 3Terra, and this individual worked with us to understand why the cases that we were struggling with, what the problem was. And it was really nice to be able to work through the logic and the methodology with other like-minded individuals to see where our problems lied. And as the result, it was orphan categories that we were struggling with. Once we figured that out, everything was jiving so nicely. And I should say, this honestly took us months of back and forth with our team, with the partner hospital that we had, and with 3Terra. And some of you now may be sitting here and wondering, why did you spend months correcting a tool when they had something else that was really user-friendly? And how did you know that the 3Terra DQA report was correct and not your report? Well, that was very simple. We actually had a Ontario Health year-end summary, which included all of our GI endo cases and weights, and we were able to confirm that the data that Ontario Health had through our coded data matched 3Terra's DQA report. So it was really nice to have that extra arm of confidence to know that the report we were testing through DQA was the same information that Ontario Health was reviewing and funding us for. And so back to my other question where I left you to ponder is, why would we spend so much time investigating a problem and trying to fix a self-service report when we knew there was a great tool available in DQA? And it was one that I sat with quite a while. And the reason we ended up not moving all of our reporting to 3Terra's DQA is that we have a number of other leaders in our organization, clinical and financial, and we just knew that we would struggle with buy-in and having them to access another tool outside of their daily workflow. It was already enough of an effort, right, to push them to our self-service report tool and have them access their own QBP data, but having them go to another tool to access another report, we just knew would be difficult. So it was at this point we reconnected with 3Terra, and we wanted to find out if they had a SQL database. Fortunately for us, 3Terra has a backend SQL database that we were able to connect directly to. This meant that we were able to keep our self-service QBP reports that our leaders knew how to access, they knew how to run, and they knew really what to do with them. But we were able to change the backend to pull directly from 3Terra's SQL instead of our very complex and quite messy data NACRS data queries. Having access to this meant that we could transition our reports, have access to accurate logic, and reports that executed in less than 15 seconds, compared to our old reports that were over 5 minutes in length. Even better, 3Terra maintained all of the QBP logic according to MOH guidelines, so we were very hands-off, and our front-end leaders did not notice any change, right? The tool looked the same to them. They just got added benefits of speed and accuracy. I did put a couple snippets, and I acknowledge it's probably hard to see, but on the left is the SQL query that was coming from our team's original, and I'm at line 1300, and there was still more to go. We were manually entering every inclusion and exclusion criteria and hoping that each one was assigned correctly. The screenshot on the right is showing the beautiful, nice and simple extract that we get from 3Terra, where all the QBPs are assigned to that patient abstract. So that then led us to know what else could we do. And the update to the cardiac funding model that occurred a few years ago holds a really similar place in my heart that GI EndoLogic does. So in a similar fashion with our cardiac funding model, we utilize SQL, extracting both our DAD and our NACRS data tables. We were following the MOH criteria, and that resulted in us having 82 temporary tables in SQL, where we would assign the patient encounter to the most appropriate procedure hierarchy, and this report was even longer to execute. It often took over 10 minutes. And for those with really good eyes, if you can see that screenshot, we're at line 1722. It was not fun, to say the least. So after we transitioned our QBP report utilizing 3Terra's backend SQL, the cardiac report for us was a no-brainer. We were definitely going to go this way. We also experienced the same positives that we had with our QBP transition. Our end users accessed the report in the same way, and it did not look or feel any different for them. They just continue to have those added benefits of accurate data with a quick execution time. And my team continued to benefit from not having to update the logic if the Ministry of Health criteria changed. And so now we continue to find other ways that we can leverage 3Terra's DQA tools to improve our workflows and our offerings to our partners. The Boren data is a really logical next step for us. Our teams have obstetric scorecards. Most of these are Excel-based, and these scorecards require one of the analysts on our team to log into Boren, execute their canned reports, and populate those results into the Excel scorecards. So not only is this time intensive, but I really don't like the risk of error when we have someone manually entering data. We did notice that 3Terra's SQL environment did have the Boren data tables, and we investigated that all but one metric that we reported on was available. So we reached back out to 3Terra and inquired about the possibility of adding an additional metric. So not only did Jamie quickly add that extra metric to the data tables, but we were able to receive 2 years of historical data. So we're in the process of transitioning, but once these are finalized, these scorecards will point directly to the Boren data, and they'll be accessed in the same self-serving reporting tools that we're using for our QBP and our cardiac examples that I shared above. This means that my team will not have any manual Excel scorecards that they are updating, and they could be accessed directly from the clinical team that needs them. We were really grateful to have the support of 3Terra. They worked alongside with us to see how these tools could be enhanced. As I mentioned, we added that metric that we needed for Boren, but they've been really supportive and receptive on how we use the tools. And I'll be honest, we actually highlighted a potential issue with the non-vascular QBP volumes. When we were transitioning, we noticed that our internal report had some volumes that were higher than the volumes reported on the DQA report. So I shared some registration numbers with Jamie and Matt, and they noted that these were clinic visits that weren't activated in their report. So when I was working again alongside our coding team, we realized that these cases were done in our interventional radiology suite. Once we confirmed that, yes, these are eligible for QBP, 3Terra then made a tweak on their end, turned on the data flow, and now those volumes are reported accurately. So to summarize, the experience we've had so far, we have found that there are some very valuable tools offered by 3Terra, right? Those front-end, easily accessible data quality assist reports with summary data as well as case-level data, and how our team has been able to quickly transition from not only supplying data to them, but being able to access the data as a customer ourselves. The wins we've had experienced would certainly be the accuracy of data and the trust that we have, the efficiency of being able to access this and not have to annually maintain all of our reports based on logic updates. That's all for me, and I thank you for your time. So if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer anything.
Amazing, Brittany. Thanks so much for sharing your story and sharing all of those examples. We'll give the chat a moment here, but while we're waiting, I have a couple questions that came to mind, if you don't mind. So when you initially floated the idea of streamlining your daily work past the team, how did they react? Were there any reservations there?
Yes, our team has explored a number of different automation options, right? And how we can think differently. And I'll say there were certainly reservations, right? When someone has knowledge that a job that they've done, right, daily or monthly is being changed, there was fear that, well, what does that mean for me? But I'm speaking for myself, and I'm sure a number of the other hospitals here feel the same way, that we're not fortunate to have endless resources, right? We are not given extraordinary budgets with all the FTE that we need, and we're constantly having to do more with less. And so once I explained to the team members that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we need to think, how can we work differently in order to have the capacity for you to be successful? And if we can automate some of the tasks that are there or utilize other tools that are there, it's only going to free up time for you. And so they've been really grateful that now we've taken that off them because there's certainly no shortage of work, but there is a shortage of resources.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So would you say that rather feeling like work was being taken away, it's almost empowered them to do more?
To do more, right. And how we can think differently and realize that there are other ways of doing things, and it's just going to open up more doors and more opportunities.
Amazing. Just checking the chat here. All right.
Well, maybe as you're doing that, Jamie, I just wanted to jump in as well. I mean,
please.
Brittany, thanks for sharing your experience. The challenge with methodologies is a significant one, right? Because the methodologies don't come in a nice, concise way that you could just implement them. They're clinical handbooks, they're SAS code. Implementing the SAS code is very complex. And to your point earlier about finding exceptional cases, we do our best once a new methodology comes out to validate against 5 or 6 different hospitals, but you'd be surprised how many edge cases pop up when you look at that 7th or 8th hospital. And so reducing that burden so that you can just use it and be supported by it, it's great to hear that you're using it in that way. Sorry, Jamie.
No, that's a great point, Matt. Thanks for jumping in. I'm just looking at the chat. It doesn't look like there are any questions necessarily, but a lot of comfort in what you've said here, Brittany. So you triggered some PSD with GI endo, and everyone else is feeling the same with the QVPs and DQA. So that's amazing. Thank you again for sharing your story, and I'm sure there will be some folks reaching out to you directly.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you very much.
Amazing.
Well, and when we first built the reporting and data aspects of DQA, honestly, we thought it would be the smaller hospitals that had fewer resources that would take the most advantage of this. Maintaining methodologies and giving direct database access to things. The reality is hospitals of all sizes are using it to support their decision support teams at this point. The commonality that we found is that teams are overburdened with a lot of different types of work. It might be ongoing work, it might be ad hoc requests, but I think the single most common thing that we hear from people is I'm spending most of my time in a perpetual firefighting type mode. And so, if there's anything that we can do to centralize solutions to common problems, that's the approach that we're taking. So I think that leads pretty well into our next session as well. I'd like to invite Luch to join me for our next session. And I'm going to share my screen. Our next session, Luch, are you
I am here.
There you are. Great to see you, Luch. All right. So, Luch is the Director of Decision Support, Performance, and Funding Advocacy at Unity Health Toronto. Luch and I are going to talk about a recent collaboration that we did between UHT and 3Terra for conservable day analysis specifically. Maybe I'll start with some background, Luch, and then you can jump in as well.
Sure.
What we've seen is a sharp increase in requests from client hospitals to understand what's going on within the building. Sometimes it's clinical, sometimes it's financial, but people want to use the data that's already in DQA to answer important organizational questions. And because we've been doing analytics for 20 plus years, we can help either from an overview perspective, like the annual executive analyses that we send out, or specific questions like the one that UHT had. UHT approached us interested in getting a better understanding of how conservable days are behaving at the hospital, really from two perspectives. How are they impacting the hospital, and what are the factors that are driving them? And before I hand it over to Luch to kind of provide some background, we should really define what it means for there to be a conservable day, because everyone uses slightly different lingo and slightly different definitions. What we're talking about is patient days beyond expected length of stay, where if we were able to discharge those patients earlier or at the expected length of stay, there would be benefits to the hospital, both from a clinical perspective, benefits to the patient, and benefits from a financial perspective. So with that said, Luch, can you explain some of the reasons that, understanding conservable days were particularly important to UHT?
For sure. Thanks, Matt. And folks, as we're kind of going through this, let's make this interactive, right? So if you've got questions, let's ask those questions. Let's put hands up. Let's chat. Put things into the chat. Definitely want to make this an interactive presentation. When I think about my journey at Unity Health, I started right before the pandemic, and I think what happened throughout the pandemic was the focus on length of stay and efficiency from a length of stay perspective really went to the wayside, and it really became about providing care for patients and reacting to kind of these unprecedented times that we had experienced throughout COVID. As we've kind of recovered out of that, there's become a renewed focus on kind of that throughput, and really there's two lenses to that. I think there's there's a financial component. Anybody who's aware of the GEM model, it's a throughput model. The more you can do with the same or less, the more you kind of get funded in future years. And that's become a real focus of our organization as we look to find efficiencies and kind of ways to sustain our budget. How do we create that throughput? How do we create efficiencies in length of stay and really target key populations in doing that? The other piece of the pie for us was really it's a patient quality component, right? So we don't want patients in a bed longer than they need to be there, and I think we need to identify those populations that are, for lack of a better word, kind of getting stuck, that aren't ALC in nature, and how do we get them discharged and sent to the appropriate destination in a quicker, faster time? So really, I think there were two lenses that we really wanted to take on that. It was a loss of focus because of the pandemic, and then really understanding the financial and the quality components that drive conservable days and how we can create a better care experience for our patients. So I'll pause here. I've said a lot in the last minute or two. Any questions, or shall we move to the next slide?
All right. So let me set this up then. So how did we approach this, right? There are kind of 4 steps that we said that we are going to embark upon to kind of understand what was going on in the hospital and quantify it. We want to look at which population should we focus on doing this for. We don't want to use a shotgun approach for this. We want to be very narrow and specific about which populations are actionable. And we can talk about what actionable means here in a moment. We then wanted to identify of those populations which had an improvement opportunity and rank them so that we know where that we should focus first. That is interesting but insufficient. We've got to go to the next level to say, okay, within each of those populations, what's driving length of stay? What are the things that we should look at in order to improve things? And then ultimately, we also want to quantify the impact, which can be done from a number of different perspectives. And we took kind of one perspective in this analysis. I think I'd like to start by talking about what populations we started with. Our kind of main goal here was to look at actionable populations. And in doing that, we decided, let's look at patient populations that have repeatable care paths, that exhibit consistent lengths of stay, but there's also enough complexity in the populations that there's potential for variation. So as an example, newborn deliveries at the hospital, very repeatable care path, very consistent lengths of stay, not enough opportunity for there to be variation for this to be interesting to look at. Not a lot of action to be taken. Mental health is another interesting one where there's a lot of variation in terms of lengths of stay and care path that it doesn't make sense to look at this as a population. So we worked with UHT to come up with the following 15 populations. And you'll notice a bunch of things about them. One, it's a mix of medical and surgical. We want to test both areas. Two, you'll see a lot of quality-based procedure type definitions in here. And the reason for that is maybe obvious or maybe not. QBP definitions generally try to follow these principles. We're only interested in patient populations where I can prescribe a care path and we can be repeatable in the care that we provide. Luch, in hindsight, were these populations that we looked at interesting? Would you have approached this any differently?
It's a great question. I think they were really interesting. It was, one of the things that really jumped out at me when I started at Unity Health was something as simple as hip and knee replacements. And what we found when we were kind of doing some data deep dives when I had first started the organization, we had a bimodal distribution in that depending on the site, you had a very different care experience. One site was much more efficient from a length of stay perspective than the other. And again, they follow what we would believe is similar care paths. And that was really interesting in trying to understand that a little bit better and trying to see if we had other distributions like that. Another experience when I was at Sunnybrook was within the congestive heart failure population, and why I thought it was really appropriate, and I still do, is depending on where the patient landed. So if they were a cardiology patient versus a medical patient, again, bimodal distribution, very different length of stay and care experience. So I do think that these populations are really it was a really good subset in terms of investigating and kind of kicking starting to kind of kick the conservative day process off for us. And there was some really interesting evidence that came out of that, as we'll go through in the next couple of slides.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump to that. The next step with those 15 populations was let's evaluate the opportunity within each of these. How many conservable days do we have? But that's not even enough. We need to look at a number of important metrics to say, are these conservable days narrowed in on a few number of discharges? Is it broad? Is it something that I can action, or is it kind of an outlier type situation? So I'll show the report that we used in a moment, but this is kind of some of the key metrics that we used. How many conservable days are there for each population, but are they distributed amongst a large number of discharges or a small number of discharges? What proportion of overall acute patient days ended up being conservable? Are we talking about a relatively small number of days, or is it a large number of days, which would be more actionable? And then the other consideration that is often overlooked is we have to take into account that there's potentially confounding factors. ALC documentation is a challenge for every hospital that we work with. Physicians aren't necessarily documenting it consistently. Coders aren't able to necessarily pick it up. If we've got a problem with ALC documentation and ultimately coding, what that means is the analysis that we do downstream here can be skewed by that. So we want to have a sense of how much is ALC driving things. And ultimately, this came up with a list of 15 different populations. We've anonymized them for the purposes of demonstration, but one of these populations is a CHF, and there's a hip replacement and appendectomy, and the rest is all in here as well. The interesting part of this is to kind of look at an individual population. So for population 1 here, we see a population where there are a lot of conservable days over the course of the year, 2,400 conservable days. More so than that, if I look at the far right-hand side, almost half of the discharges have at least one conservable day. It's not that it's a narrow number of cases, it's a pretty broad challenge that we're having with this population. And similarly, 1 in 3, 3 in 10, a good portion of our acute patient days are conservable. These are days that patients are staying past ELOS. And so this ends up being a population of interest. And of the 15 that we had, this was the most interesting population of interest because not only did it have the most conservable days, but we can potentially action it in a number of different ways. So as I'd mentioned from the outset, actually, maybe I'll pause there. Luch, had you ever looked at conservable days in this way, and how did this compare to past conservable day analysis?
So in my previous life at Sunnybrook, there was, and again, different time, obviously, there was a much greater focus on conservable days at the time. Again, was a very different time. We weren't coming out of a pandemic and whatnot. It was similar in nature. It was a little bit different, but yeah, very, very similar in the way that you've kind of approached it and how you're doing the reporting. And it made sense to me, right? So it resonated with me and my ability to then take this data and how do we start to action and understand how do we shave off essentially one day for every patient that comes through the door for this population. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the question is pertinent, right? Yeah, we've got a population of interest, but if we stop here, it's not enough. The question is, what's actually driving this additional length of stay over the course of 1,000 discharges? And so, in order to answer this question, we went, one step deeper. This is for that particular population one, and what we've done is a correlation analysis to identify the key factors contributing to additional length of stay, contributing to conservable days at the hospital. We started with the coded record. We had 12 or 15 different factors that we went through. We looked at discharge unit, site, to what Luch said earlier, because we suspected there was a site challenge. Did the patient have diagnostic imaging done? What was the patient's age? And any number of other things as well. And ultimately, what was identified was for this population, these were the three biggest drivers that we'd had. And some of these, aren't intuitive, at least, to me as a starting point. So the first driving factor that we found in the population was harm. A relatively small number of patients in this population had harm. 43 out of over 1,000 patients had harm. However, when those patients had harm, the length of stay and the conservable days associated with those patients was significant. They ended up staying 7 days, give or take, past ELOS, compared to an average that was closer to 2. And this drives a lot of additional conservable days. And so one of the things that Luch said to me is, okay, well, what type of harm? Like, what are we talking about here? So, we had to do the next level of analysis down. Is it delirium driving this? Is it UTI? Is it something else? Who are we looking at so that if we want to investigate harm and what the commonalities are, what should we be looking at next?
I think this is really critical in that we can then take this level of detail and really start to do some deep dives and chart audits with the clinical teams to start to see were there opportunities where we could have avoided some of these harm issues, and how do we decrease conservable days just by changing a practice or two. What is it that drove kind of the fact that somebody had a UTI in the hospital, and that was really, really important because this allows for actionable kind of outcomes and changes in practice that will, hopefully in the future, impact our conservable days and our length of stay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and then similarly, harm wasn't the only factor. Obviously, it was the most, impactful one, but there were other factors as well. So diagnostic imaging usage was the second that we looked at. How many of these patients had some sort of a form of DI in the hospital and how many that didn't? 30% of the patients had some form of diagnostic imaging. And when the patient had DI, the length of stay or the days past ELOS was twice what it was for patients that didn't have diagnostic imaging. This obviously isn't saying you shouldn't be doing diagnostic imaging in the least. What it's saying is that there might be something in the flow of patients and the prioritization of when these patients are getting imaging, how it's getting resulted, the timeliness of that might be, impacting things.
I think this information is really useful because, in my title, advocacy is a component of that. Data like this really helps drive advocacy. So, I'm sure Unity Health is not unique in that we are underfunded from a diagnostic imaging perspective. So, if we are able to have additional supports from a funding perspective, perhaps we are able to create enablers to discharge where we can have expedited DI utilization, hence getting people in and out of the hospital faster.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the third factor, I don't remember honestly if this was the third most factor, if this was just one that Unity's particularly was interested in. But oftentimes people come to us and say, I think we've got physician variation. I'd like to at least test that theory. And so what we did is a physician variation. By physician, how many discharges do they have? How many conservable days do they have? And in this case, we were able to identify a few physicians where we're seeing some variation. Our best performing physicians on the right-hand side, have very few conservable days, not zero, but very few conservable days, where some of the providers that maybe there's a difference in terms of care path or how they're delivering care was far more than average.
Yeah, very, very interesting. My previous life at Sunnybrook, a lot of physician comparisons, a lot of looking at it this level of granularity. And again, to Matt's point, I think there was some opportunities here where this may be a conversation about care pathways, right? So how do you identify kind of where we're varying off the path, and what are those physicians who are really high performers from a conservative data perspective doing in terms of that care pathway and making sure people stay on it. Really, really important information.
Absolutely. Very good. I did see that there was a question come in through the chat about what's the scope of conservable day analysis that we did. Did we do all patient days? Did we just do typical patients? For this analysis, we honed in on typical discharges. Yeah, I think there's different conversations to be had about whether this applies to a long stay case or applies to a transfers in, and I'd kind of defer that as a separate conversation. But certainly, we did this for typical patients within the scope of this engagement.
And although we'll get into that in a later slide, as we've started to roll out our own conservable day reports, we focus on typical as well. Again, atypical, there's so much variation and kind of in drivers to different length of stays that we wanted to remove some of that, for lack of a better word, noise.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I do want to talk about how we quantified this, and I'm going to actually skip ahead to the next slide. There was an element of this where we want to make sure that the problem, the challenge with the population is big enough to warrant effort and focus on it. There's a number of different ways that you can evaluate what is the impact of a conservable day, or more specifically, additional length of stay within a patient population. You can do it from a clinical outcomes perspective. You can do it from a cost perspective, which we were considering doing, but case costing data wasn't readily available at the time that we did this. So we decided to do this at a funding perspective, and let me explain how that worked. Population one, the one that's highlighted here, is the same as in the previous slides. And what we did is we looked at, of the discharges in this population, how many of them had conservable days. And we've recalled them as unfunded days here. So we're naming them unfunded days. Why are we doing that? Well, within the HIG methodology, you get funded on a flat basis for your typical cases. And that is meant for a length of stay at the HIG ELOS. For each day that the patient stays beyond ELOS, you do not receive any additional funding, but obviously the cost that goes into treating that patient accrues over time. So what this analysis did is it said, okay, what if we could have discharged all of those patients directly at the expected length of stay? What would have happened? And what would have happened is we would have been able to replace that patient with a new patient at that point in time. With new patients in the bed, and in this case, we're assuming patients of the same type based on the weight per patient day at ELOS, it would have generated an additional 580 weighted cases for the hospital. And if we use a proxy for what that means from a funding perspective, we're talking about a $3.8 million, give or take, additional revenue, additional funding for the hospital. Now, we can't just look at one side of the coin, because over half of our discharges, we were able to discharge prior to ELOS. We actually benefited from early discharge. And so we do the flip side analysis on the right-hand side for overfunded days. Of the 537 cases, we saved about 1,500 patient days, and that meant we get overfunded, quote unquote, by about 300 weighted cases, which is equivalent to give or take $1.9 million. But even if we net that out, this population has a significant opportunity and a significant funding effect given the length of stay that we have here.
This was really staggering when we got to the net funding effect. It really showed the impact of conservable days from our ability to create that churn and allow us to fill that bed with another kind of contributing patient. Really, really interesting, and a really different way of looking at it than what I've experienced in kind of my history within healthcare.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
we'll probably steal it in the future, to be honest.
Amazing. So that's the way that we quantified things. And we thought it was really important, right? Because we want to make sure that we're looking at the right things at the right time. And we know that hospitals don't have a chance to look at everything all at once. We need to prioritize. And this was a big part of that. So as we kind of move forward and talk about next steps, we're going to have Luch talk about his next steps, and I'm going to talk about kind of our lessons learned and next steps about this as well. If there are any questions that haven't come through the chat yet, please send them through, and we'll try to address them as we go through this. Luch, what were kind of the key lessons learned, and ultimately next steps? What are you going to do with this information going forward?
So it's really interesting. One of the things that we really, really wanted to do is we moved kind of out of the pandemic and back to kind of, I'm going to say, quote unquote, kind of a normal operations. How do we build those efficiencies? How do we create transparency? And what I mean by that is, how do we routinely report on this? So we had a couple of stops and starts in the past year and a half in terms of trying to figure out a conservable day or BLOS methodology in terms of creating some reporting and awareness across the organization. So what we've done is we've leveraged kind of the work that Matt and team and 3Terra have done for us, and we've started to kind of customize that for Unity Health. So we will have a much more transparency in terms of the ability to report this on a more routine basis. We're integrating this into our performance management framework. So what are we doing? We're engaging with our clinical teams on a more routine basis and a more detailed basis. So what we've done is we've taken kind of a programmatic view plus a HIG level detailed for non-QBP activities to identify key drivers to conservable days at a program level. So by site, by program, we're targeting key areas to performance manage with our clinical teams. How we collaborate across departments. So how do we think about the DI example, and how do we optimize our ability to create throughput with utilizing those enablers like DI, like labs, like EVS services, those types of things that will enable quicker, faster turnaround times of our patients. We do report conservable days on a monthly basis to our board. So this is really, really important. Our organization, one of the tasks or mandates we've been given by our board is to increase our market share, and a way to do that is to increase your throughput. Again, the more throughput you have, the more weighted cases, the more people you can bring in, the more weighted cases you can generate, the larger your market share. So we report this on a monthly basis, our BLOS, our conservable day or BLOS metrics as a percent of total. So we report that to our board in comparison to peer organizations and the old Toronto region LIN. And then how do we educate and train? So again, how do we educate our folks? We've had a lot of turnover from a leadership perspective. So within our routine reporting, we actually level set with the group. What is a conservable day? What does this mean? Some of the things that we've talked about with, in this presentation, we're really trying to level set with our group and educate them on what these things are and how do we kind of create an environment or a culture of efficiency and high level patient care. So those are really, really important things and some of the key drivers in terms of our routine reporting and education within our group. I'll pause.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any questions, folks? Yeah. I mean, I do see there are a few questions worth addressing as well. More from our side of things than the UHT side of things, but I'll address them if we're waiting for any questions to fall through. Have we looked at different ways to evaluate ELOS? We chose to use the provincial HIG ELOS as part of this, and there's benefits to doing that, particularly given how it aligns to funding within Ontario. However, if you look at things from a clinical perspective, sometimes clinicians will say, well, the CMG ELOS is a little bit more appropriate from a clinical perspective. And the reason for that is it takes into account comorbidities and things like that. We can do it either way. And we've built in the ELOSs for both provincial and national in order to support that. I think it depends on why you're doing the analysis and ultimately what you're trying to get out of it as to when you would choose one or the other. So maybe that'll roll into kind of what 3Terra learned in terms of next steps with this. Doing this initiative with Luch and UHT was really eye-opening for us. But what's been more eye-opening is the number of hospitals that have reached out asking for different types of analyses. So Luch wasn't the only one that was interested in this. We've done this sort of analysis and similar types of analysis for others. And what we've ultimately found is that we need to respond and help hospitals with greater transparency and visibility into this. We've created a new service offering that provides a set of analyses that includes this conservable day analysis to you on a quarterly basis. Conservable day analysis is kind of just one part of why hospitals want to understand what's going on. Weighted activity is another key piece, and Luch talked about GEM activity and market share and things like that. Hospitals generally want to understand how are your weighted cases changing, but also what's causing them to change. Is it exceptional outlier cases? Are we doing more transfers? Are we handling ALC patients better or worse? We need to be able to keep on top of this to understand what's going on. And because weighted cases directly impact funding mechanisms like GEM and others, this is meant to kind of keep you in the loop on that. Emergency department analysis as well. Most hospitals have a good handle on pay for results, 90th percentile metrics and things like that, but understanding key wait times and quality indicators and the trends and the correlations is a little bit trickier. So what we're offering as part of this is a correlation analysis to say, what is a higher PI? Why do we have a higher PIA despite fewer patients? Why are we seeing a large increase in patients on Sunday afternoons? Some of this is informational, some of this is actionable. Why are we having more patients return to the emergency department? What types of patients are they? How many resources are they taking up on a given week? So on an ongoing basis, you can kind of keep track of this. And then from a QBP perspective, I mean, monitoring funding risk is something that we've heard time and time again. Keeping an eye on where we're projected to have the most financial clawback, where we're going to have the most overage, and ultimately, what can we do about it? Can we look at scheduling elective procedures? Can we focus our data quality efforts in a particular area to make sure that we're not, leaving anything on the table? So if you're interested in learning more, reach out to me. We can set up a half-hour call to explore how this might work at your hospital. We'll put a link in the chat in terms of scheduling some time if you're interested, and if not, reach out to me, Matt at 3terra.com for more information. All right. So with that, I'd like to thank Luch for joining me today. I appreciate your insights on this and partnering with us to kind of do this sort of analysis. And thanks for making the time for us. Jamie, let me pass it back to you to introduce our third session today.
Amazing. Thanks so much for sharing, Matt and Luch. It's always exciting to hear how our clients are digging deeper into their data. And I especially like that you had a specific area of focus and some great ways that you want to apply this at UHT. I'm sure that gave everyone a lot of new ideas that they can bring back as well. So for our final session of the day, I would like to invite our panel to turn on their cameras and microphones to discuss something that you're likely all very familiar with. So funded volume reporting and reconciliation. Each of the hospitals that are going to be joining us is unique in the way that they provide patient care to their communities. And they've all used DQA in different ways to meet their funded volume reporting and reconciliation needs. Just scooching along. Amazing. You're all on. Wonderful. So please welcome Naomi, Candace, and Coralie to join us to share their experiences on how they've traditionally done this reporting and where their process is at now. So I'll ask you to unmute here and we'll kick this off. Can you please tell us a little bit about who you are and your role at the hospital? Coralie, I'll ask you to go first.
Sure. So my name is Coralie Purdy, and I'm an analyst and most recently a supervisor at the Queensway Carleton Hospital in Ottawa. So we're a large community hospital. I've worked here, so my background is health information management. So I've worked at the Queensway Carleton for almost 25 years now, and 23 years as an analyst. And prior to that, my first job was at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto and did sort of coding and release of information way back in the day. I'm an old dog.
Thanks, Coralie. Candace, if you'd like to go next.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Candace, and I work at Southlake Health. I started out actually in scheduling and then sort of transferred over to decision support, first as an analyst and then as a consultant. And I've been here at Southlake for about 7 years now, primarily supporting surgery and now sort of shifting over to cardiac.
Last but not least, Naomi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Naomi, and I am from the Pembroke Regional Hospital. I graduated from the Health Information Program in 2018, and I've been with Pembroke since. Started off as a health information coder in medical records, and then transitioned to decision support and sort of data quality. So doing data analyst, wait time coordinator, and then linking with medical records for data quality as well. So a little bit of everything. And we are a small team here. So just to give a perspective, there's only 2 decision support analysts here at Pembroke. And we do everything. We have a relationship and coordinate with finance, medical records, and our senior leadership team for data quality.
Great. So Naomi, I'm going to keep you on here. I've got a number of questions that I'd like to hear all of your experiences on, but of course, please feel free to our audience, drop questions in the chat so we can address those. Naomi, can you please share how your hospital historically approached funded volume reporting and what challenges did you face?
Yeah, so before DQA, before the wonders of 3Terra, here at Pembroke, we had a very, very, very manual process for gathering all of our data, all of our reporting for funding. And some of them were more challenging than others. As we know, the GI endoscopy was a huge challenge. And so every month we would dedicate, I'm going to be conservative and say probably about 3 days a month where we would have to run every report manually for QBPs, for wait times. And we unfortunately did not have an SAS program, so everything was kind of had to be manually done. And then as we know, certain exclusions and inclusions change every year, so that would be a process that would have to be done yearly as well. So on a monthly basis, about 3 days of time running those reports manually, individually, one by one. And as we all know, that's very challenging. We don't have enough time in the day to do all these manual processes. So once we implemented DQA, after about a little bit of time getting used to it, the time has been kind of gained back. So it's been much better currently than historically. So.
I'll tell you a little bit about Queensway's experience. So back when something like quality-based procedures first came about, what I did, and I think we may have had one other analyst in the department at the time, is I replicated or tried to replicate all of the QBP reports and Crystal reports, which I'll be honest with you, I do still use. We since have a business intelligence tool, and we have some QBPs in there, but our focus has been to report on other things in our BI tool. And so, you'd go through the methodology books, you would create Crystal reports. I never really knew if my numbers were correct until you got the reconciliations back from the Ministry of Health once a year. I was pretty confident, but maybe not super confident. And we don't use SAS at QCH, so that like the ministry providing that methodology was not very useful for us. And so again, like Naomi said, every year new methodology would come out, and so you had to go back and look at your reports. And like we've all mentioned, even Brittany, in the last once the endo QBP methodology came out, everything changed. It got really, really difficult. I do remember at one point CCO, I think it would have been at the time, providing record level data where you could reconcile your endo. They got away from that. So just that yearly, taking the time, and we're also a very, very small department. We have less than 3 analysts that work in our hospital right now. And so the time to recreate methodology was very time consuming. You never really knew if your methodology was correct. And so the DQ tool has been very helpful in terms of not having to do that, every year. And the other thing that happens in our hospital, I don't know if it happens elsewhere, is sometimes the technical documents don't trickle down to our department. And so you're trying to look for the new updates every year from whoever in the hospital gets that methodology in order for it to come to decision support. So that's sort of what we did and what our challenges were with some of the funding volumes.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, very similar experience here at Southlake. I mean, we would, every year you get the technical definitions. I would go in, I'd review them, and then I would build the Crystal report. So similar to Coralie, we'd go into Crystal, we'd build all the inclusion/exclusion criteria in those reports, and typically it would be one sort of procedure group per report. So you'd be going in every month, running each report, and then updating this in an Excel template month by month. each time you needed to do an update. So extremely time consuming, prone to error. We're just manually looking, transferring over to Excel. And yeah, so I just reiterate what has been said, very manual, time consuming, difficult to know if you're correct. Just waiting for that reconciliation at the end of the year. So that was really how our process was prior to DQA.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of our audience members can also commiserate with that. You've all kind of gone through the manual effort. It's time consuming. So Candace, I'm curious, did you have any reservations when you started relying upon DQA for funded volume calculations?
So I would say yes, for sure. There were reservations when we were first looking to work with DQA. I would say the first is really just how do you trust the numbers that are in DQA? How do you have confidence in those numbers? Because even though it was a process that was very manual and time consuming before, you had confidence in it because you were part of the process, you know what went into it, you reviewed those technical specifications. You had that confidence level. This is something new. I don't know who's built this. I don't know if this is right. I don't know if there's someone in there checking it. So initially when we signed on, which would have only been last fiscal year, there was a pretty extensive validation process. So I would go in, I'd run all the volumes for 2 years, month by month for each procedure, checking to see if there were any differences. And then if there were, highlight those and then get those encounter numbers. So going through that process really allowed me to know or allowed me to gain sort of confidence in those numbers, saying, okay, I did see matches. And where I didn't see matches and where there were discrepancies, we would go back and forth. Okay, I'm seeing this. Are you seeing that? And if you're not seeing that, why would that be? Because according to what I have, it should be in. And, what was good is that there was really good communication, really quick response times, which is fantastic, just to see where that discrepancy lies and be able to trace it back. So sometimes it was on my end, I had something and I shouldn't have. And then sometimes it was an update we needed to make in 3Terra, and you guys would go in and make those adjustments there. So there's constantly that sort of back and forth just to validate what's in there so you can have the trust that, okay, I can trust the numbers in here because they are matching what I have internally. So it is kind of a good thing we went through that manual process so that we can do that validation and sort of have that trust. And then I would also just say the second big reservation is we do know that 3Terra can help us identify cases that are near misses. And what we don't want to do is just go in and say, yes, 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 and make all the changes that are suggested. I mean, we do know that there are coding standards, coders know what they're doing, and just making sure that they have the confidence and authority to be able to say, actually, I don't agree with this check. We can't do it this way, and then sort of move on to the next one. So because we have that relationship with health records, with the coding team, and we do know that they are scrutinizing these checks. They are scrutinizing what's coming up in the tool and being able to, not make changes if they feel it's not appropriate, but also make those changes where it is. So having gone through that process and seeing that, it also gives you that trust that, okay, we are making the correct changes, not just any change that is suggested. So I would say those are sort of the two major reservations and kind of what we've done so far to kind of combat that.
Yep. I'll just pretty much just say, just like Candace at South Lake, our initial concern at Pembroke was, how can we trust this computer essentially, right? Like we all think about AI and like I was doing this manually, so I know that I can trust my manual processes and, I'm doing this every single month. I can make the changes if I need to, etc. So we went through a very similar reconciliation process of running the manual reports, comparing them to 3Terra, going back, a year or 2 years, and then really validating that, okay, I can, 3Terra, I can guarantee that 3Terra's volumes are right, and I no longer have to spend the time and reconcile. So we did reconcile for like a yearly, and then we did it for the first few months just to kind of get that trust base kind of set in. And very similarly as well with Candace, whenever there was sort of an issue or, my numbers are slightly off, we'd reach out to Jamie and we we could give them examples like, I'm counting this one, why aren't you? And then they would kind of tell us, well, this is excluded because of X, Y, and Z. And then you would then realize like, okay, so there was something in our manual process that we were missing all along, or vice versa, right? So 3Terra has been great to kind of have that conversation, have that kind of digging in piece. So initially we did have concerns just like anyone else would, but it's been great to have that, that they ensure accuracy and validity. So it's been wonderful now.
And well, I guess we all have pretty similar stories. So the same idea, we had our internal reports, and then we would run the 3Terra reports and see where we're off. I'll be honest with you, I still do that because I still like our internal reports to match. So I'll be honest with you, at this point it's on my end because I'm not reconciling as much anymore now that I tend to use the 3Terra, the DQA and 3Terra. But I still like to know that my volumes match. And so the same idea, reconciling, looking at where one of the final reports that would have come back from the ministry where you knew your volumes were set and did it match internal and did it match 3Terra, and still that same reconciliation. Now I just know it's usually on like my report end and not not the tool.
I mean, all of these points are completely justified. We want to earn your trust, right? So we don't want anyone to be shy, and this goes for everyone in the audience as well. Don't be shy to reach out. Matt alluded to this in an earlier session. Even though we validate with a number of hospitals, edge cases come up. And so we want to know about that. So never hesitate to send one of us an email. We'll definitely ask you to drop some samples in your DQA file share so we can reconcile that. But I think this is an important point to bring up. It'll take some time to adjust and kind of make that transition. So Coralie, let's talk about internal process a little bit. Do you coordinate your year-to-date QBP progress with the data quality team at Queensway?
I do. I mean, so what our process is when I tend to, like, I don't particularly look at near miss QBPs. That's done. I don't have capacity to do that, so that's done by the data quality team, and we coordinate in terms of if there's any methodology we want to go through, and like, do you think this case should count, not count? So I have a really good connection that way. The other thing that I do quite regularly is when I'm updating our quality-based procedures monthly, I often look at cases that fall out of the QBP. So for instance, it falls into the wrong HIG or even out of province ones. And I usually send the charts back to the data quality coordinator and just say, can you have a look at these and just make sure it is or isn't like, maybe there was a registration error on out of province or something, because we don't want to like miss QBPs for funding. And the other thing that I work quite closely with them is on sort of weird cases that might show up. So all of a sudden we have a cancer case of something that we don't normally do at Queensway Carleton Hospital. And so I will, send that case back for review. And so we're often like looking at where we are with QBPs, making sure there's not data quality issues and sort of coordinating together as often as we can. And same with when the near miss QBPs are being looked at on her end, then we'll often coordinate and she'll let me know the numbers have been updated. We go back and make sure we're sort of all on the same page so that those we're reporting quality-based procedures to have the most recent up-to-date numbers as they can. So.
Yeah, and maybe if I could jump in over at Southlake, when we first joined DQA, we sort of joined towards the last quarter of last fiscal year. So we didn't have a ton of time, but we were focused on the sort of funded volume end of it. So what we did do is pretty much weekly, we'd run through the QBP recoveries from 3Terra just to see what type of cases are we recovering, what is the dollar amount associated with that, just to sort of get an idea of what is the impact this tool is having in terms of our funding for QBPs. So we would have those weekly initially. That has slowed down since, but it did really help us sort of have an eye on, okay, what are we doing? What are we correcting? What is the sort of volume of that? And also just as a, I guess, sort of learning tool for the coding team as well, those reports would let us know, there's a trend. We're constantly seeing the specific change go in, and the coding team recognizes that, and then they learn from that. And what we do end up seeing in this fiscal year is we're seeing less of those types of cases because they're starting to learn that, okay, it's very important to make sure that your most responsible diagnosis is accurate because it could make a difference between something being QBP and not. So having that sort of regular touch point with those reports and with our coding team sort of helped us get through that piece and really make an impact on the sort of recovery end of things.
So at Pembroke, we might be slightly different in the sense that I am the data quality team, I guess. So I would access the DQA and look at all the different reports. But our coders also have access to the DQA, so they individually will go in and look at, the QBP near misses, the inpatients or the outpatient case reports, and then they will monthly kind of validate their own data quality checks. But on my side, when I'll go in and kind of review these data quality checks, sometimes I think like Candace and Coralie mentioned, it would kind of bring out other sort of data quality issues that we may not have even had the time to notice beforehand, or without doing like a chart review or chart reviews. So in Pembroke, we are still very much paper-based. We do not have an electronic health record yet. So having that sort of that data quality alert, so to speak, in DQA has eliminated some of that manual process as well that we honestly would never have had time to do before. But now it'll bring up other sort of data quality issues that we can now bring to our coding team and kind of validate or look into other things, which has been very, very great.
I mean, all of your team dynamics are so different. So it's no surprise that there are some slight differences here. But I think what you all share is the fact that there's two sides to this, right? You want to make sure that you're communicating between the teams, or if you are the sole team looking at it from different perspectives. I think that's a really, really important point. We hear this from almost all of our clients all the time, right? We want to make sure that we have those regular touch points so then the data quality team can kind of focus their efforts if needed, and you have a little bit more insight to when was the last update for this or the last review. It's great. So I have another question here, and I'm going to leave this one kind of open to whoever wants to jump in and answer this one first. So if you could highlight one aspect of DQA that's made the biggest impact on your workflow, thinking back to what you had all noted with historical, but even where you're at right now, what would that one aspect be?
I'll jump in. If I only had to pick one, it would really be time. We've all said it, that the time saving is really a big one for us, especially like Coralie said, if you have a smaller team, even saving a few hours means, you can move on to something else or do something else. So for Pembroke here, it's really been time. It's been great.
And I'm gonna say the exact same thing. Time savings, when you know the reports are valid. Excuse me. Like Candace, my crystal reports were one report for each QBP. It took a really long time to run those every month. So it's really great to have the, one report to run. And also, which I'm sure a lot of hospitals, right now there's been a lot of the incremental surgery recovery happening. And so it's been great to go and get some historical volumes, like trending of historical volumes, because we're always projecting our QBPs because we have a lot of discharges and ER visits, and we're the 60 days, behind on coding, like I think a lot of bigger hospitals. And so it's been great to just go into those historical reports, run them, try to get an idea of what we've done in years past. And so but the time savings alone, I'm going to say it's very, very noticeable for me, particularly in my monthly work. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing for sure. It's time, but since that's been spoken to so well by both Coralie and Naomi, I'm going to say sort of second to that would also just be confidence from the clinical programs that you are capturing as many funded volumes as possible. Because I will say previously we didn't have as robust a reconciliation process as we maybe wanted previously. What it would typically be is clinical programs looking at a particular procedure group or funded volume and sort of thinking like, I think we've done more than that. Can we double check that? And so we would go back in, we'd run sort of a broader population, see who fell out, and then double check those cases. But we can't do that for everything. So it would really just be some of the more higher value funded volumes or something that was pointed out specifically from the clinical programs. And we sort of do a deep dive into that particular one, which, as you can imagine, is not necessarily the best way to capture as much as you can. So at least now that we have this tool and we know that it is picking out near misses, we have the confidence to say to the clinical programs, yes, we have been reviewing these cases. That one did fall out. We reviewed it, we checked it, and have that process in place and have it be robust and routine and monthly and daily. And the coding team is going through these every day. So it does give us that ability to speak to the clinical programs and have them have that confidence that we are looking at these cases and we are sort of pulling out as much as we can in terms of funded volumes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the clinical program piece is something that we don't always really think about, right? But I'm sure it's been a great way to be proactive with that relationship and maybe even open up communication a little bit more as well, rather than there being a lot of frustration and confusion behind the scenes.
Yeah,
Naomi, did you
absolutely.
have something you wanted to add there?
No.
No, that's okay. I mean, I'll open this up. We'll give the chat a moment here. Are there any additional comments that any of you wanted to add?
I mean, the additional comment I'll add, it's not necessarily for funded volumes, but I've found the tool in general very useful for HSMR. Like mortality rate's very important for Queensway, and it's really nice that I can use the tool and not have to wait for Kai to send back. And I think I did quite a bit of reconciliation with the 3Terra team on that when our numbers weren't matching, and now I'm very confident so that when we finish a month of coding, I know what our HSMR is, and I don't need to wait for the data to come back to Kai. So a little bit off topic from this, but there's been other things that we're looking at for the tool and hospital harm recently. So the tool's been really great for that. Outside of sort of funded volume stuff, it's been very useful for us here at Queensway. So
Great point, Kimberly. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe if I could just quickly jump in. So similarly, not necessarily specific to funded volumes, but I'll just say that what has also helped us is just the ability to have new data quality reports within DQA. So of course, there's a whole suite within DQA that you're just going to get standard, but there are some other pieces that we've been looking at more recently related to flagged interventions, also related to the reconciliation of cardiac procedures that we have been working with 3Terra on adding into the tool. And some have already been added, some we're still working on adding, but just having that ability to identify different data quality issues you might be dealing with specific to your hospital and working to get something in the tool itself so that your team can go in and see those in a very sort of transparent way. We do have other sort of internal DQ reports that we are also trying to move over to 3Terra just because it's so streamlined. The coders actually really enjoy using it, and they have even asked us, are there some that we have separately that we can put into 3Terra just so that everything is in one place? So I find just that ability to sort of customize your reports and have additional reports has been helping us as well.
Thanks for that, Candace. I mean, we're always looking for new suggestions, right? Our platform is driven by our DQA community. We want your feedback. We're not just saying that. This is how we're able to put out so many releases throughout the year. We want it to be a live platform. We want to continue improving and adding new things. And if there is a check that you want that's really custom to your hospital, we're more than happy to work with you on that as well. So never hesitate to reach out to us with any of that. I mean, while I've got you on the screen here, Candace, I have a quick question. And then Joel, I promise I will get to yours as well. in your opinion, what is the most difficult funded volume to report or reconcile? And I'm sure Naomi and Coralie have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it was mentioned earlier by Brittany in the earlier presentation, but GI endo, 100% GI endo. I think that very first year it came out, I had attempted trying to make a CRIS report for that. It did not work out for me. We did end up going to, we also used Med 2020. We did end up going to them, and they do have a patch that is available. So we ended up going to Med 2020 and used that because I just didn't really have confidence in the one that I was making. There were just too many differences, and it was getting a little out of hand in terms of the time I was putting towards it. So in the end, we did have to go with sort of buying the patch for that because of how complex it was. So for sure, GI Endo and having it available in 3TERA is definitely saving us there.
Yeah, I will second that. It even got to the point where I couldn't even reconcile because I was like, my report really doesn't make any sense, and I'm not getting near close the numbers that DQA was giving us. So yeah, the reconciliation process was futile.
And
Similar
same for us.
to
Same experience. The first year, maybe the first second year, I could match volumes, and then their last bit of methodology, honestly, like I just gave up. Quite
well,
frankly.
we're happy to reduce some of the headaches there. So Joel, I'm just going to address your question in the chat. So have we been able to get direct access to some of these new methodologies? Unfortunately, we are still relying on our hospital community for this. We do not have direct access. One of you spoke to this a little bit earlier as well. New methodology comes in even within the hospital, and it doesn't always trickle down, right? So please, if anyone hears of any new methodologies coming out, share them with us. Often what'll happen is Matt and I will get, 5, 6, 7, 8 emails with it attached. We want that. It kind of drives home the fact that, this is coming out. Everyone wants to stay up to date. We want DQA to stay up to date as well. And then we'll work with you to validate these updates to the calculations along the way as well. All right. So, Eric has a question in here as well. So maybe we'll just jump over here and maybe one of you or all of you can speak to this. So for ISR, how are folks running their globally funded surgeries?
I will say at South Lake, primarily using iPort Access, there are some volumes in there that they actually give the coding for, and then we'll just run it through Crystal because those are pretty small, typically just ECT that I can remember, and potentially one gynae volume that I might be forgetting. But typically we'll use iPort Access to run the volumes for ISR.
Same with that Queensway. That's what we did recently, and there's a few of the wait time volumes that we use, well, the DQA tool for. I don't think we're funded for them anymore, but I think when they were trying to look for us to increase our volumes, we used that. But wait, the WTS was the source for us too. Yeah.
Same for Pembroke. Yeah.
Well, just to recap, you all have such different hospital structures and team dynamics, but you shared a lot of the same experiences. And we really hope that this resonated with our audience because it was great to have you all here. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and joining us. I am just going to share my screen here. Fabulous. All right. So thank you again to all of our speakers here today. If you have any questions for any of them, we know that there were a few questions we didn't get to in the chat, but please feel free to reach out to any of them with a quick email. And just to close things off here, thank you all for joining us. This was amazing. We had over 165 folks in the event here today, and our recording is going to be shared on Thursday, January 23rd. We'll share this with everyone that registered, and feel free to share it with your colleagues who weren't able to attend as well. If you ever wanted to check out past recordings, all of this is on our website. So you can use that link there. And then finally, we want to hear from you. So just like our platform is always being updated based on your suggestions, Innovation Center events are also driven based on your feedback. So our future themes, the topics that we discuss, and even the speakers, they're all driven by this community. So if you could take a few moments and either use the QR code on the screen or the link that we're going to drop in the chat here, we want your input so we can ensure that these future events are valuable to you, worth your time, and we're discussing the topics that you want to hear more about. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.